Hey man, Shane here. Let's talk about how big we should get to be our healthiest, look the most attractive to women, and look the most aesthetic to ourselves and other men. We'll start responsibly with health, and then we can dive guilt-free into the more controversial stuff. Health. For a long time, the healthiest body weight was thought to be a BMI of 18.5 to 25. To put that into context, here I am underweight with a BMI of just under 17. Here I am at the bottom end of the healthy range with a BMI of 19. Right now, I have a BMI of 25, so I'm at the very upper limit of the healthy range. And here I am overweight with a BMI of 26. BMI isn't a very good way to figure out how healthy you are though, and there are two situations where it can be especially misleading. First, if someone is skinny fat with skinny limbs and a barrel belly, they might be both under-muscled and too fat, both of which come together to give them what appears to be a healthy BMI, even though they aren't healthy. Second, if you're carrying a tremendous amount of muscle mass, you might pop off the top side of the range, which is where this gets a little controversial. The main study looking at muscularity and health is this one, which I heard about from Greg Nuckols at Stronger by Science. The researchers looked at fat-free mass index, which measures how much lean mass you have for your height. They found that gaining muscle improves your health up until a fat-free mass index of about 20, which is about the amount of muscle that Brad Pitt had in Fight Club. After that, the health benefits plateau. Gaining more muscle isn't any better, but it also isn't any worse. They couldn't find a point where gaining extra muscle started to harm people. So, as long as you stay natural and build muscle in a healthy way, you can build as much muscle as you want. The next thing to consider is body fat percentage. You probably want to keep your body fat percentage between around 8% and 22%, which means that you shouldn't get much leaner than Jeff Nippard after a cut, and you shouldn't get much fatter than Jeff Nippard after a bulk. Measuring your body fat percentage can be finicky though, so you might prefer to measure your waist circumference instead. The common recommendation is to aim for a waist circumference of half your height or less. So if you're 5'10", then you'd be aiming for a waist circumference of 35 inches or less. But you don't need to be too strict with it. It's okay if you bump up above that while bulking, and it might even be fine to stay there. The National Institutes of Health say the problems only really start to pick up at around 40 inches. Still, keeping your waist circumference under 36 inches is nice and safe, and it also looks great, which brings us to the next section, attractiveness. Attractiveness is tricky because men love muscle far more than women do, which means we don't always have the best intuition about which types of physiques women prefer. Here's a mating researcher talking about it.
I'm a scientist studying human mating behavior, and while studies typically show that women prefer muscular men, they also generally show that men want to be more muscular than women prefer. And I don't think you necessarily need a study to know this. You can just go to the store and look at the male bodies in men's magazines versus the male bodies in women's magazines. You're not going to see a lot of dad bods in either, but it's conspicuous that men aspire to more muscles than women desire. And this anecdotal take of mine was corroborated by a 2005 magazine study. So why do men overshoot women's preferences? Well, it could just be a bad guess, right? There's some evidence that men think women like more muscles than they do. However, it could also be that men want excess muscle not for attracting mates per se, but competing with rivals, right? Getting jacked could get men status or scare away their competitors. To put it in sexual selection terms, it could be that huge muscles are less about intersexual selection and more about intrasexual competition. And I've seen some memes that indicate as much. And for what it's worth, if you saw my last video, it's possible that something structurally similar is happening with women. Women generally want to be thinner than men prefer, and while it does seem that women overestimate how much men like thinness, it could also be that getting super skinny is a way to obtain status and flex on other women.
In the world of modern bodybuilding, the best physique is usually the one that's the biggest and the leanest. And if you succeed in building a physique like that, there are absolutely women who will love it. But they're a very particular kind of woman. Women do love excellent physiques, but the vast majority of them aren't judging excellence like a bodybuilder would. Instead, they see excellence in the physiques of guys like Cristiano Ronaldo, Michael Jordan, and these Italian Olympic swimmers. That's the sort of physique that most women imagine when they imagine the perfect male physique. That brings us to another bit of controversy. Some bodybuilders have this theory that fitter women like stronger men. So, if you want to date a fit woman, then it pays to look like a bodybuilder. And there's surely at least a hint of truth there, but I don't think it's fit women who are drawn to bodybuilders. I think fit women are drawn to fit men. I think rather it's the bodybuilding sorts of women who are drawn to bodybuilders. It's a smaller niche within the fitness industry. There's also a theory that younger women prefer thinner, more feminine men who are less intimidating. Think of guys like Justin Bieber, Edward Cullen, and Timothy Chalamet, where they're thin and clean-shaven and younger looking, more boyish. And then as women get older, they start to prefer stronger, more masculine, more mature men. If we look at the research, most of it shows that women prefer men who look strong, athletic, and healthy, but without being excessively or unnaturally muscular. My favorite study is this one by Dr. Aaron Sell. He found that the stronger a guy gets, the better he looks to women, with no upper limit. That sounds like being a huge bodybuilder would be the best, but this study was done on college guys, none of whom had accumulated an extraordinary amount of muscle yet, and none of whom appeared to be taking steroids. I spoke with Dr. Sell, and he told me that muscle probably starts to become a turnoff once it reaches semi-inhuman levels, but within natural limits, stronger tends to be better. Just to make sure, I ran my own surveys, and, as expected, most women chose the physiques of the guys who were strong but not excessively muscular. I also asked my wife who her favorite celebrity physique was, and she said if she had to pick, then Harry Styles, because he looked like he was in great shape. She said her least favorite physique was The Rock, because he looked vain and unnatural and weird. So, attractiveness seems fairly similar to health, except maybe bumped one level of muscularity higher. Once you get to the level of Brad Pitt in Fight Club, or maybe a little bit higher, maybe as high as Brad Pitt in Troy, then your physique will plateau with women. But you're free to keep gaining muscle. As long as you stay natural, it won't ever hurt your appearance. Just to make sure though, I asked the biggest natural bodybuilder I know of, Jeffrey Verity Schofield. He told me his attractiveness plateaued at an FFMI of about 22 or 23, which is quite muscular. It's a little more muscular than Brad Pitt in Troy, but it's still very obviously naturally achievable, especially if you have good muscle building genetics. He's gotten quite a lot more muscular since then, and it hasn't harmed his appearance, and his wife hasn't complained, but the extra muscle hasn't made him even more attractive, at least as far as he can tell. There is a potential benefit to building even more muscle though, which brings us to the next section, aesthetics. There's some research showing that compared to women, most men prefer physiques with an extra 15 pounds of muscle. I'm not sure there's any hard limit to it though. Most men think the muscle looks cool or intimidating, so the more of it you build, the cooler or more intimidating you'll look. On the other hand, most people think steroids are lame and that the people who take them look vain and stupid. Abusing drugs because you have body image issues doesn't represent excellence, and it isn't aspirational, and as soon as you venture into that dark alley, you start giving off a sketchy vibe, at least to most people, or at least most people my age. It could be that there's a fad right now where male teenage bodybuilders prefer maximally muscular physiques, even if that means taking steroids, similar to how Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone were popular in the 80s. And I think that's putting teen guys in a rough spot. I made a video about that here. The good news is that almost everyone can build an amount of muscle, naturally, that looks awesome to almost everyone else. Dr. Eric Trexler from the Mass Research Review estimates that someone with bad genetics can get up to an FFMI of about 21, which is about how muscular Brad Pitt was in Troy. And if you have great muscle building genetics, you can get closer to an FFMI of 24, which is dramatically more muscular than that. And if you have world-class muscle building genetics, or if you're willing to gain a tremendous amount of body fat, then you can get even bigger. Some natural bodybuilders from the pre-steroid era made it up to an FFMI of 28. However, this gets a little trickier when you consider that the biggest muscles in the human body are the quads and the glutes, and most guys aren't that interested in building maximally enormous quads and glutes, which takes a point or two off of their FFMI without really affecting their appearance very much. That means if you're built more like a fighter or a gymnast with a bigger upper body and a proportionally smaller lower body, you can look muscular at a lower body weight while carrying less total muscle mass. And it gets trickier still because BMI and FFMI both take into account how tall we are, and I have this sneaking suspicion that our height doesn't factor into our ideal weight as much as most people think it does. What I mean is, maybe a guy who's 5'8" and a guy who's 6 feet tall both look best at around 180 pounds, even if that means the short guy looks stockier and the tall guy looks thinner. Maybe it's someone's overall size and weight that matters most. Maybe that's what gives off the impression of being strong and formidable. I'm not sure. That brings us to the bonus section. The golden mean. The golden mean was popularized a little over 2,000 years ago by Aristotle. His idea was that virtue is found somewhere between deficiency and excess. So, courage is found somewhere between cowardice and recklessness. Temperance is found somewhere between indulgence and restraint. And self-respect is found somewhere between vanity and humility. This is similar to the idea of the middle way in Taoism, where you're supposed to find balance between the opposing forces of the yin and the yang. And it's the idea being taught in the ancient myth of Icarus. Icarus and his father, the master craftsman Daedalus, were imprisoned in a labyrinth with a minotaur. To escape, Daedalus fashioned wings made out of beeswax and bird feathers, and they hurled themselves out over the ocean. Daedalus warned Icarus not to fly too low, lest the feathers get soaked by the spray from the waves, nor too high, lest the wax get melted by the sun. Icarus's recklessness wasn't tempered with enough cowardice, and he flew too high, and his wings melted, and he died. I'm guessing he has an FFMI of about 20, which explains why all the Nereids are crowding around his body. When it comes to fitness, you could think of being big, bulky, and powerful as being at one extreme, representing excess, whereas being light, lean, and endurant would be at the other extreme, representing deficiency. Both extremes have value, so it's best to be somewhere in the middle. When you train for pure strength, it pays to eat in a calorie surplus, it helps to weigh more, and it really helps to build bigger muscles. And there's seemingly no limit to that. The strongest guy in the world right now, as far as I can tell, is Mitchell Hooper. And if his Wikipedia page is to be trusted, then he's 1 inch taller than I am, but weighs almost 150 more pounds. Sumo wrestlers are even heavier than that. Some of them have fat-free mass indexes as high as 36, the highest ever recorded, which is extremely cool, but it comes at a cost. First of all, it's reasonable to assume that these guys are taking performance-enhancing drugs, which are complicated, expensive, dangerous, unattractive, and unhealthy. But even if these guys were natural, there would still be a cost to it. As you build more muscle, you get heavier, which means you need to carry more weight when you walk and run, and it sends more force crashing through your joints. Your resting heart rate goes up, your VO2 max goes down, and your body converts more of your muscle fibers over to fast twitch, meaning you get more power but less endurance. That means that moving towards strength, even if you do it naturally, and even if you're incredibly physically fit, still means moving away from stamina. At the other end of the spectrum, if you train for pure endurance, then it's better to be lighter and leaner. You don't want to carry any extra weight, and cardio adaptations don't demand many calories, so you don't need to worry about eating in a calorie surplus. So, the best endurance athletes are tremendously thin, with very little fat, very little muscle, and very little strength. You lose out on the other half of health and athleticism. Bodybuilding is already between these two extremes. Bodybuilders train with higher rep ranges than powerlifters and with much shorter rest times, which means they gain quite a bit more fitness and endurance. The best bodybuilders also do a fair bit of cardio and keep themselves reasonably lean, but they're still all the way over here with the strength and power guys. And that's perfectly fine, but it's also perfectly fine to veer more towards the other side, focusing on stamina, even if that means losing a couple of inches of arm circumference.
Some people would be a stronger, healthier, more physically capable person by getting their mile time under 10 minutes, not by killing themselves trying to bring their deadlift from 395 to 405. Or a recent comment about, the more I see you run and jump, the less weight I see on the bar. Again, 1 rep max barbell strength is not the only thing that I care about. I think that I'm strong enough.
So if you're aiming for health and longevity and attractiveness and aesthetics, then anywhere in here between the fit natural bodybuilder and the strong marathon runner is awesome. And most people, especially out of the bodybuilding niche, won't really consider one of those two bodies better than the other. Here's a cool example of that. This is Alec Blennis. He's 5'5", 165 pounds, and has 15-inch arms. He runs ultra marathons, and he's impressively strong at a wide variety of strange exercises. He doesn't look like a huge bodybuilder, but he also isn't thin like the best marathon runners. He's excelling in the virtuous middle. I've noticed that in the lifting niche, there's this temptation to view the health and fitness guys as failed bodybuilders. When Jeremy Etienne makes a video about how to build muscle, bodybuilders doubt his credibility because he looks like Brad Pitt in Fight Club instead of like Mike Israetel. But I don't think he's trying to look like Mike Israetel. I get the impression he's trying to have balance, and I think he's succeeding at that. And if you consider how successful he is, it's clear that even in the fitness industry, even when you're teaching people how to build muscle, you still aren't forced to be extremely muscular.
Most people, they don't want to look like a big, roided out monster. Jeremy Etienne, I think he's natural. Most people probably think he's natural. I think he has a good physique, and he has a physique that most people would want to look like. Certainly not being on steroids hasn't hurt his growth. He's doing just fine.
Personally, I want to be able to bench 3 plates, deadlift 5 plates, run a marathon in under 4 hours, and do it all in a way that's healthy and sustainable and doesn't have me picking up chronic injuries. That means I'm being pulled in 4 different directions, which is a little bit like being hanged, drawn, and quartered, but in a good way. Alright, that's it for now. Curious to hear what your goals are. I'm also curious to hear if you think I got anything wrong. I hope to see you in the comments, and I hope to see you in the next one.